of Time, which is the sixth and final story in season 15. Of course, stars Tom Baker as the Doctor, Louise Jameson as Leela, and John Leeson as the voice of K9. It's written, the credited writer is David Agnew, who is not a real person. It is the sort of pen name used because this story was actually written by the producer Graham Williams and the script editor Anthony Reid. This story is also directed by Gerald Blake. He is a real person. And yeah, this is a six-parter. And it's an infamous story. Nearly on the same level as Underworld in terms of its infamy. I felt that this story was a real story of two halves. And that is partially by design. It's sort of structured like a four-parter with an additional two-parter. And that initial four-parter, which involves the Doctor arriving back on Gallifrey, he's acting very shifty, he's not telling Leela what's going on. He comes back to Gallifrey, demands to be made president, and then invites a group of aliens to basically come and take over Gallifrey. The aliens called the Vardans, which is of course all a big ploy, and he eventually defeats them. I thought that initial story, which comprises the first four parts, was pretty good. I enjoyed the sort of, although of course I knew that the Doctor had not turned evil, but I enjoyed the mystery of why is he acting the way he's acting, why is he not telling people what he's doing, and the way Tom Baker performs it, and it's a very different kind of, there's a coldness that is really noticeable, which I think, to be fair, is quite impressive, because as much as I love the Fourth Doctor, I wouldn't necessarily say he's the most warm character. He can sometimes be a little bit detached, but there was a real sort of steeliness to his performance in this. The Vardans, who are famously rubbish bits of tinfoil, I thought were okay. I mean, it's not great, but I thought the effect was fine. I enjoyed seeing more of Gallifrey. I thought reusing sets from The Deadly Assassin, the previous season, was a very smart way of getting around the money issues they had. I thought Leela had some, fun stuff to do. I enjoyed the first four parts. The Vardans are defeated a little easily, I felt. There's very little fanfare, and it's just like, okay, well, yeah, we dealt with them now. And I think if it had just been that story and that was how it ended, that would have been underwhelming. It would have been disappointing. But of course, that's not how the story ends. Because at the end of part 4, the Doctor has defeated the Vardans, but the Sontarans show up, and the final two parts deal with the Sontarans, and the final two parts took a real nosedive. I felt in terms of my enjoyment. I don't like to say in terms of quality. I don't like to call things outright bad, but I didn't think that this was very good. The Sontarans were not particularly threatening or impactful. And of course, they go into the Doctor's TARDIS and it's just an old hospital. And it's not awful, but it's not good. I didn't think the Sontarans were defeated very satisfyingly either. Not much more than the Vardens, which was a real letdown. And the fact the Doctor just used a big gun on them is a bit rubbish. Another thing that's really rubbish is Leela's departure, where she falls in love with a guy who she's barely spoken to and stays on Gallifrey with him. But there's very little goodbye, or it's just not very good. And I think that the story goes that I think Graham Williams thought that he might be able to convince Louise Jameson to stay on for a bit longer, and so he didn't really bother writing her an exit because he thought that she was going to stay anyway. And then she didn't, and so they very quickly rushed this love story. And I don't know if it was Graham Williams or Anthony Reid. I think it might have been Anthony Reid in the making of, who sort of said that not that he was pressured into doing the sort of companion falls in love, but that people were like, oh, they don't do that very often, so do that. And he did. And yeah, I think they kind of all agree that it wasn't the right call. It doesn't really fit Leela's character. It doesn't, the characters simply don't have enough there. I'm trying to think, have I seen every instance where, I think aside from Vicky, I have seen every instance where a companion falls in love off screen and leaves because of it. And I think of the 3 notable ones, really notable ones, being Susan, Jo and Leela, this is absolutely the weakest. Because at least there's some legwork done in the Dalek invasion of Earth. And there's a real honest, iconic goodbye scene with the Doctor and Susan, and the Doctor realises that she wants to stay here and this is where she wants to be. And Jo, there's a great dynamic with her and Stuart Bevan. It is Stuart Bevan, isn't it? As the characters, whatever his name is, I forget what his name is. But there's a real dynamic there, and it's, again, there's a genuine departure scene, and I think the thing that sells it not only is the performances between the actors, but I think it's when the Doctor kind of understands that they don't necessarily want to stop travelling with him, but they do want to stay with this person, and so he goes, okay, then you stay, and I'm going to let you go. And that doesn't happen here. The Doctor says, come on, Leela, and she says, oh no, I'm staying. And yeah, I felt it was very, very weak. And I can imagine Louise Jameson being very disappointed that was the end for her character, because it's a bit naff, to be honest. And I think it's a shame that the last 2 parts of this story, for me, really, really drag it down, because I thought that whilst the first 4 parts are nothing special, realistically, it's not a bad story. The intrigue of the Doctor arriving back on Gallifrey and acting shifty, and why is he doing that? It's a good story, and I enjoyed it perfectly well. But the last 2 parts are really, there's a reason why that's the thing that people talk about with this story. Yes, that cliffhanger with the Sontarans is great, but what follows is pretty underwhelming and pretty rubbish. And I enjoyed it about as much as Underworld, or more accurately, about as little as Underworld. So it's a shame, because I was having a much better time with the story than I thought I might do. And then it kind of fell off a cliff a little bit. And so ultimately, it's not a story I'm much care to revisit. I can't imagine, but it's not without its merit. And I think, especially when you consider that it was sort of a last minute writing job because the previous script fell through and they had very little money at the time, and all these problems that we do know about. I think it's admirable, but I think the end result is not entirely successful. But those are my thoughts on the Invasion of Time, and therefore my thoughts on season 15 as a whole. I considered doing like a ranking video for the season. I don't think I will. I'll go through my ranking now of the stories, because I think I can probably do it off the top of my head. If we go from least favourite to the one I least enjoyed to the one I most enjoyed, we'll go that way. So at the bottom is Underworld, which I felt was very weak. I understand why it is the way it is, but I don't think it's very successful, and I think even if it was filmed conventionally like the rest of the show, it would still not be a strong story. Then, number 5, I'm going to put the Invasion of Time, which, I just think, as I've mentioned already, had, a lot of potential, and the last 2 parts really kind of derailed my enjoyment of the story. And I think ultimately the end product is not very satisfying at all. Then number 4, quite a big jump up in terms of enjoyment, but I'm going to put The Invisible Enemy, which I had a good time with, a good introduction to K9. But just not my I just prefer the other 3 stories more. Then it's a little bit difficult to pick between number 2 and number 3. I think I'm going to put Image of the Fendahl in 3rd. I very much enjoyed it. I like the setting, I like the atmosphere of it, I like the characters. But I think I did enjoy Horror of Fang Rock just a fraction more, so I'm going to put that in number 2. The more I think about that, as much as, I felt that you could really sense that Tom Baker didn't really care for that story, and I might be wrong about that, but I think the way that story used, I think the direction for that story from Paddy Russell was very impressive, and the atmosphere of that, and the way it used sound and everything, like, I just think it was very competently made, which is not to say that the rest of the show is incompetent, but I just think everything kind of worked really well in that instance. And of course, number 1 is The Sunmakers, the story I was most anticipating watching, and it really didn't disappoint. It's not the best story ever, but I love what it was saying, I love what it was doing, I love the vibe of it. It was great for Leela to get, some really good material. And, Tom got some good material, a great villain performance, a really enjoyable story. So those are my rankings for season 15. Those are my thoughts on season 15 as a whole. What did you think of this season? Did you enjoy it? What's your favourite story? What's your ranking of the stories? yeah, let me know. But aside from that, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your time. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you and goodbye.